Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. It's Friday, so we have another Khyber Shards Answers, and I'm going solo today, just for ease of scheduling. We're going to deal with some game mastering questions and some campaign questions about Khyber Shards. But first, I want to announce that we are making a run for another giveaway from the Lazy Fox Creates. This time, we'll be giving away this beautiful leather dice bag. Again, handmade, hand-painted, hand-designed, all by Laura at the Lazy Fox Creates. We'll be running a giveaway of this dice bag once the Laughing Tree hits 100 subscribers. We're currently sitting at 56 as of this recording, so a very small start and a very modest goal. So tell your friends, if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button, and once we get to 100, we'll run another giveaway just like the last one, and give away this dice bag to one lucky winner. But for now, we're going to jump on in to our questions. So we have a number of really good questions today, for a solo one particularly, so it must be a while since I did one of these. First question comes from Mia. I believe this is your first recorded game, correct? If so, what are the pros and cons of recording? Do you find that it affects your GMing style? So not exactly my first recorded game. I am on a podcast called Eberron Renewed, where Eric runs the game, but it is my first time GMing a campaign for recording. So the cons of recording the game are there's a certain amount of pressure, just performance-wise, but additionally, it's probably a little bit harder to schedule when you're recording because you do have a release schedule to maintain, and as anyone who's ever tried to run an ongoing campaign knows, scheduling is your worst enemy. Recording just kind of adds some pressure to that, so it is a little bit more stressful in that sense. There can also be, and I'm sure for most GMs who record, there is also just a feeling of judgment, I guess. Like I've felt very, very lucky. The audience reaction to, within our small little audience, the reaction has been very positive. I've never really received much criticism at all, let alone any kind of rude or harsh criticism. I have seen Eric receive harsh criticism as the GM on a podcast for some of the things, and Eric's very good at handling that diplomatically, and I'm impressed by that because I'm usually madder at the criticism towards him than he is. So there is that. You are opening yourself up to the judgment of your peers, of other creators. And while some of them will offer you good, useful criticism, others will just rag on you because that's the internet, unfortunately. The same thing is true for cast. Cast can be subject to the same thing, although a lot of times you see it mostly targeted at the game masters. So that's a con, or a potential con. We've been pretty lucky in that we haven't had a lot of really negative comments towards any of the people on the show, and I'm really appreciative of that. I'm really appreciative that the community that has followed this show has been so supportive and so constructive in their comments. Another is there are some limitations on what you will and will want to do. You're forever comparing yourself to other actual plays. It's just impossible not to compare yourself as a recorded GM to guys like Matt Mercer or Brendan Lee Mulligan or Brie Iyengar or any of the other really successful GMs out there online. It's just not possible not to compare yourself. And as with most, I think, creative endeavors, you're usually your biggest critic. And so I look at the things that I've created and I look at the ways with hindsight that I could have done better. and that can be very positive or very negative depending on where you are mentally in that particular moment. Or you see something that another GM does online, and you're like, oh man, I wish I had thought to do that, but you also don't exactly want to copy, so things like that. Technology adds another dimension to it that is different from just playing online, because just playing online, you can kind of put up with bad audio or poor quality video, or if you've got a bad internet connection, you just turn the video off and play audio based. You can use whatever images and whatever maps and whatever music you want when you're just playing, whereas when you're recording, especially for something like for a general release, you have to consider copyright, you have to consider all of these things, because obviously you want to honor the creative ownership of artists out there. And so you don't want to use anything that you don't have permission to, that you don't have license to. Whereas, for personal use, that's less of a big deal, because you're not potentially monetizing it or in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, our channel's not monetized, but we have a merch store, we have a coffee. People do and can contribute money to what we do based on what we do, and we obviously wouldn't want to gain any of that by using someone else's work without their permission. So you have to be a lot more careful about the content that you grab. And then for us, at least, due to our cast being spread around this region, it does mean recording remotely. It's not possible for us to set this up and record it at the table. If everyone lived close by, that would be my preference any day, to play in person and record it rather than to play over the internet and record it. So for us, at least, it has limited the ways in which we can play. And that means that some of the things I like about playing D&D, miniatures and stuff like that, are limited. Now, obviously, my efforts to use 3D HeroForge minis recently shows that I'm not going to be stopped from using minis and getting to play with minis in spite of playing remotely, but that's another thing. And then I would say, in terms of the way it's affected my GMing style, I do think a little more carefully about what I introduce into the story, in terms of not just, is this good, but if I do this, is there the potential that someone on the internet will take it amiss and become really offended? Now, I don't have a big enough audience to worry much about that, but it's very easy for even minor mistakes or misunderstandings or misspoken words to get spun out of control on the internet, as all of us, anyone who's been online, has seen. So you do think a little more about that when you're introducing something, or when you're plotting a storyline. You think very carefully about the way you introduce characters. Sometimes I would say that's good, making me think more carefully about the way that I describe characters can be good. And I would say I've improved as a game master by being more careful and thinking more in advance about the way an NPC is, or sounds, or anything like that. So yeah, there's just some things like that you want to be a little more careful of, because it is desirable, if at all possible, not to give offense, in my opinion. It hasn't really held me back on anything in Khyber Shards. I pitched Khyber Shards as family friendly. I pitched Khyber Shards as a pretty light PG-13 rating. And so it wasn't like there was anything really intense or mature I wanted to introduce that I haven't because of this, but it gives you a little more to think about. I was already a little used to that from playing on an actual play podcast, of being a little more careful. And that, so that just flowed easily into game mastering, I would say. So I would say it affects my game mastering style, and then I'm a little more thoughtful ahead of time about what I'm doing. Even when I'm improvising, I'm more inclined to be careful of what I say, but not really. I honestly can't think of something. I can't think of something I wanted to do that I then thought, nope, everyone's going to be mad if I do that. I really can't think of an example of it. So I feel certain that I am more careful as a GM when I'm doing it in public, as it were, but I can't think of an example to give you of something that I've actually held back on. So it hasn't significantly changed it. And I would say that watching Khyber Shards is not super different from seeing the way that I run a game at home for my players. So my regular home campaign or my One Ring campaign, both of those look pretty similar. Some of you are in the audience on our some of you in the audience are on our Patreon, and you play in the Patreon campaign that I have been running. So I don't know if you've noticed any differences between the way that I am as a GM here and the way that I am as a GM in private. Let me know. I'd be interested to know what's noticed. I'm not the best at self-evaluation, so I'm perhaps not the best person to ask. So yeah, if you know, let me know. But yeah, that would be my thoughts on the ways it's affected that. The pros of running it online are obviously you get to have a lot of fun with the community. Our show is real small, but I've really enjoyed the community that exists around it. Doing the watch parties on Mia's Discord server have been a huge amount of fun. I love it. Doing Khyber Shards Answers and answering questions like this, that's a ton of fun. So the pros far outweigh the cons. The cons are mostly just challenges that you overcome. I didn't know how to edit video or how to record or any of that stuff before I did this. I didn't have any idea how to design merch or, there's a whole lot of things I've learned to do because of this. And so I picked up a bunch of little skills that are probably useless in 90% of life. But hey, they're new skills. You learn stuff. Learning is always good. So Darren asks, as a DM, how do you thread the needle of giving players some agency when negotiating with very powerful NPCs? Yeah, this has obviously happened a lot in Khyber Shards. The players have negotiated with Stormlords, and now with, in our most recent episode, with a powerful member of a dragon-marked house. The difficulty is that you run into is this. When you ask for a role of diplomacy, you have to have in mind what's going to happen either way. So if someone is... So we didn't really do any diplomacy roles in the most recent episode because the roleplay was going so well, and I felt like the roleplay supported the outcome. Plus, to be real honest, Esri didn't haggle nearly as much as I thought he would. And so it didn't really feel like he needed to have roles to win her over to a position. He mostly just accepted Lady Miravella's terms. So there's that. But when you are role-playing with a powerful NPC, you have to consider what the actual possible outcomes of a diplomacy roll are. Succeeding on a diplomacy roll, even a natural 20 on a diplomacy roll, doesn't necessarily mean you get whatever you want. Succeeding on a diplomacy roll means within the parameters of what you were trying to get, you get a good result. That might mean the NPC gives you what you wanted. It might also mean you asked for something really impertinent and the NPC isn't offended. Like, a classic example is you're negotiating with a king. You ask the king to hand over the crown to you. You roll a persuasion check and you roll a natural 20. That doesn't mean the king comes down off the throne and gives you the crown. It means that the king is amused by your impertinence, and I give you advantage on your next check in this social encounter or something like that. So I think you want to give the players agency to try to direct the flow of the conversation as much as possible. On the other hand, there are times where the very powerful NPC needs to be very in charge of the situation. The most recent conversation, I think, is a good example of that. Lady Mirabella held pretty much all the cards from her perspective. Esri saying no would represent a certain failure to her because she's been instructed to carry this out. But, and I think probably this has something to do with Esri's willingness to say yes, it's also fairly obvious that if she can't get what she wants this way, she has other ways of getting what she wants. So for her, she's completely in charge. And had Esri tried to haggle with her a lot, it would have really depended on whether what he was asking for represented a loss to her, or whether he was actually going to be able to hold her to anything that she promised. Another important point, an NPC that's not necessarily 100% honest can say yes to anything the players want and not be bound by it. Now, obviously, you have insight checks and different things that players can do to understand that they're being disingenuous, but it's there. So had Esri haggled, I'd have not had her agree to anything that was actually going to cost her anything, would be what I would say in this particular encounter. She would have been happy to do things that cost her nothing. She's got lots of minions. She could send them out to do little errands, but she wouldn't have agreed to anything that cost her something. If Esri had asked her to track down Tommel for him, she doesn't care about Tommel. Tommel's not in the city. She doesn't have assets outside the city in the jungle, so nah. If Esri had asked her to, I don't know, kidnap, I don't know, I can't think of a good person, but some other powerful dragon marked house leader or a storm lord or something like that. No, she's not going to do that. She'd have just said no, because for her, walking away from this conversation isn't a big loss. The threat to the players, in my opinion, in this encounter was pretty minimal. She didn't actually need them dead either. And there's no particular reason why it should turn to violence unless the players start something. So, yeah, you have to know what the NPC values, but my inclination is usually to give the players as much agency as possible while knowing what the NPC's lines are. What are the boundaries beyond which the NPC will not go? What's the NPC willing to give? What's it easy for the NPC to give? And what will the NPC not give, regardless of the persuasion rolls? Some NPCs are more prickly than others. A good example of that would be to go back to Pog's attempt to trick the White Raven into thinking he had rescued him. Pog's proposition of how he had rescued him was a neat notion, but the way that Pog expressed it was not very believable to someone who's very smart. The White Raven has a high insight skill, and there was no particular reason for him to believe that. Now, because of the good role play and because of the good idea, I had the White Raven not immediately resort to fighting. He's willing to buy time until he can get control of the situation and then decide what to do. But there was no version where he was going to just go along with the players entirely freely, because they hadn't really sold the notion to him, in my opinion. and even a good deception check would have had a bit of limited impact in that to me, or a good persuasion check for that matter. So, yeah, you got to figure out where the lines are and what they're willing to give and what they're just not going to give. And then within that limit, those are the limits, and the player's role-playing skill and roles can, move the success meter up and down within those bookends. Certain things might move the bookends. Like I might, really impressive role play or introducing something that had not occurred to me might move one of the bookends. But generally speaking, that's the scale in which we're working. So that's kind of how I try to think of it: is what are the success meters for this character. One kind of a way, perhaps a tool for doing that is to look at like the patron descriptions in the Eberron Rising from the Last War book, because it talks about what kind of aid and what kind of jobs. And if you were to just change the phrasing of that to what are the resources they're willing to give away, what are the kinds of things they want done, that can become a guide to what they're willing to do and what they're going to just say flat out no to. RA asks, which of your players is your favorite? Who would you boot from the game if someone forced you to at gunpoint? We need drama for the sweet, sweet views. Well, but I'd have to like lie in the title or something of why I'm kicking Esri off the show in order to actually get the views from that. The mere content wouldn't be sufficient. I just don't have favorites. I love all my players with perfect equality. And I just hope if somebody had me at gunpoint, they'd want something more than that. Nathan asks, thoughts on how to introduce children to RPGs? Yes, absolutely. Having done so. This is going to sound like I'm being glib. Find a children's RPG. Don't try to look at Dungeons and Dragons and simplify it. You can. I'm not saying, let me rephrase that. I wouldn't look at Dungeons and Dragons and try to simplify it. You can succeed doing that, and if you're really good and just love doing that kind of thing, then go for it. But there are numerous really good game designers who have designed games for kids. Hero Kids is amazing. It's inexpensive. You can get it on DriveThruRPG in PDF forms. That's what I used. No Thank You Evil is also pretty cool. I think it is slightly more complicated, but Hero Kids is really great for a few reasons. One, it's super easy to play. It uses a couple of D6s, and that's it. There's no mathing involved. Certain number up or above on the D6 is a hit, so all you got to be able to do is tell the numbers and count up the hits. So the mathing that's involved is extremely minimal. Counting and greater than, less than. And honestly, you could walk a kid through that if they're still learning that. I would say, well, based on what they say, they suggest you could play this with kids as young as 5, and I think you could. I have played it with a 7-year-old real easily. The other really cool thing about Hero Kids is there are several PDFs that are just heroes, pre-generated heroes for you to play, and all of them are a little half-sheet character sheet with a line drawing portrait, and along one side, a double-sided paper mini that you can cut out, glue together with a glue stick. The great thing is there's no color on it, so it's also a coloring sheet. And so also are all of the monsters. The monsters are also little coloring sheets. So you can have, a coloring day or just do some coloring and then play. The adventures all advise how long they take, and they range from about 45 minutes to a couple of hours. There's one, I think, that recommends playing it over multiple sessions of, and so a total of 3 or 4 hours. It's assuming a shorter attention span, which I think is a really strong point of Hero Kids. The combat is quick, it's easy. It's also easy to dial up or down in description however you want in terms of violence. Are we killing or are we just defeating or scaring away? You know, depending on your kid's maturity and your comfort with those ideas. The drawings of the monsters are monstrous but cute as well. And it's very easy to GM. The adventures that are written it's very linear. I mean, this is not a sandbox campaign sort of thing. It's very linear. The adventures are straightforward. They're fun. And I would say well written. And the intention of it is that once a kid is a strong reader, it suggests that kids 7 or 8 years old could GM. And so it's also a great game if you've got a younger kid who's interested in running the stories to take over and start telling the stories. It does have some support for leveling up, mostly by means of gear rather than an actual leveling system. So that is a limitation of it. But my experience was that when my daughter was starting out in RPGs, she didn't really want to play a continuous story of the same character. Every time we sat down, she had a different idea for who she wanted to be this time. And so she wanted to look through all the character sheets and pick somebody new. So that was my experience. So I don't know that that's actually a weakness of telling a new story. It's not going to rely on memory. It's not going to rely on being able to do it regularly. It is just there. It's a lot of fun. There is also if you do want a 5th edition, probably this is for a little bit older kids. If you do want a 5th edition concept, there's a setting called Wardlings. That's really neat. The premise is that in this world, only the kids can see the monsters and the danger and that kind of thing. And so they have to be the ones to go out, and in Wardlings, everyone gets a pet. There's little pre-painted minis that are really cute. The monsters are all fun. It's 5th edition, so if you're looking to build up into regular D&D, you can check that out. There are lots of rules for pets and magic items, that kind of thing in Hero Kids as well. Also, everyone starts out with a certain number of healing potions in Hero Kids, and the rules say you get candy, and you set them on the little healing potion spots on the character sheet, and as you take the healing potion, you eat the candy, which is also, I would argue, strong. So, Nathan also asks thoughts on how to help players who enjoy playing RPGs but feel that they aren't very good, or who really do struggle with some aspects of the game. Take the pressure off of them. Express consistently that there isn't a being good. That's not a thing. If they feel really down on it, and there's someone will receive this well, you can ask, what is it you think you don't do well? Which would allow you to give more tailored advice. Because when someone says, I'm not good at RPGs, I don't exactly know what they mean. Does that mean you don't remember rules well? You're not comfortable improvising? You don't like role-playing? What do you mean? It may be that they don't enjoy the particular RPG you're playing, in which case you might think of, what if I introduce a different one? What if we try something else that will play to this person's strengths as opposed to this other person's? The difference in amount of stuff you have to remember between 5th edition and something like Fate is night and day. Fate requires so little remembering of spell slots and that kind of thing. It's all right there. So maybe that player is going to really dig Fate or something simple like that, and just doesn't like Dungeons and Dragons as opposed to RPGs. For me, though, it's being encouraging, noticing the things they are strong at, and giving them opportunities to shine doing that. If this person's really good at role-playing but can't remember their spells, and so battle is just a mess with them, give lots of opportunities for social roleplay, for social encounters, or ways to solve problems diplomatically. That's going to allow that character to shine. Advise them to pick just a few spells and just consistently use those instead of worrying about the whole spell preparation system, which is dumb anyway. So yeah, those are some ideas, but find the things that they're good at and emphasize that. Reassure them that you're not expecting them to perform at a certain level. And if you are expecting them to perform at a certain level, maybe stop. It's a game. You're having fun with your friends. And as long as no one is like deliberately ruining the fun of everyone else, then everyone's support. Encourage that it's totally fine to make it clear at your table. Normalize asking for help with the rules. Someone says, gosh, I'm trying to remember what I can do. It's okay to point it out. It's okay to remind them. There's nothing, you're not cheating. You're not ruining the game to remind them. It's okay. And I wouldn't impose time limits unless it's just something that everybody's really comfortable with. Some people like say, okay, if your turn takes longer than 2 minutes, we're moving on. I don't know about that. I understand the impulse, but at the same time, that's just going to add pressure. So those are some of the pieces of advice that I have had. I have had players who struggled with different aspects of the game, players who struggled with being comfortable role-playing, players who struggled with remembering the spells or remembering all of the rules or that kind of thing. And just being supportive, being positive, making sure that they know that you're excited, that they're playing this game you love, and not that you're worried about whether they're doing it right. That's my approach. It's not everybody's approach, but it's mine. So, and you asked me, so you get mine. Nathan finally asks, are there any Eberron NPCs or villains from various source books that you haven't used yet, but would really like to? Haven't used ever or haven't used in Khyber Shards would really affect this. In Khyber Shards, there's a ton of them because Khyber Shards is so localized that there's just a huge amount of stuff that I haven't messed with. So I'm going to answer the bigger question. Are there any that I've never done? I've never run a game that dealt heavily with Karrnath. I think it would be really, really fun to run a game that deals with some of the politicking around King Caius and the various characters, some of whom are secretly undead and some of whom are openly undead, and just all of the crazy politics of a system where you've got, or of a country where you've got mummies who are high priests and vampires who are part of the government and all of this stuff, in addition to the sort of Germanic martial tradition thing that they've got going on. I think those are all really cool concepts that take Gothic horror into a non-Gothic horror setting, and I think that's really fun and really cool. So I'd really love to play around with that. I've also never really played around with Arganessen as a faction or a setting in a game, and I think that would be really fun. So I guess I would, short answer to your question, if I had to pick one, King Caius, yeah, and the Karrnathi Royal Court, I think would be a lot of fun to run a game surrounding. I have a couple of ideas for campaigns set in Karrnath that I think would be really, really fun, and maybe you'll see one someday on the Laughing Tree. So I don't want to get into it too much, but I have a pretty cool, I think, idea for a Karrnath-centered action adventure game. So, Laura adds, or maybe any past characters you might have played on a different podcast that would have been great additions to Khyber Shard as a Khyber Shard NPC, but they quote unquote didn't fit or something. I mean, I'd explain why I didn't include Barrick, but there would end up being spoilers, and I try not to do that in case anyone wants to go listen to Eberron Renewed. You know, and I mean, Rick from Kids on Bikes, he could probably be somewhere in there, I guess. Anyway, Emily asks, somewhat related to Nathan's question, do you have any tips for helping players memorize basic mechanics of their own class? I have a thing that works well for me and that I like using both as a player and as a GM. I don't know that it will work for everyone, and it doesn't work digitally very well. I really like tokens and manipulables. I really like having tokens to mark out how many spell slots I have or how many uses of this thing that I've got. I like having tokens to remind me that I've got inspiration, because I always forget when I've got inspiration. I love giving out item cards instead of just items, because then you have this thing, and it reminds you that you've got this cool sword or this cool bow or this awesome armor and what it does. So for me, something that I can hold in my hand really, really helps me. Now, digitally, that doesn't work very well because obviously it's not physical. It's not tangible stuff. And that makes it really, really hard. So if you're working in a situation where that's not possible, or where your player's not going to like that, just gently cueing them when they've got something. And hey, remember you have inspiration or something like that. Digitally you might be able to put, if you've got if you're using a virtual tabletop and you've got a map with tokens, when someone's got inspiration, you could put a marker on their token. Most virtual tabletops will have various status markers you can put on the token. You put a marker on the token that reminds you they've got that, or if they've had haste cast on them, a marker for that kind of thing. And I mean, you can buy commercially made physical tokens for everything. And if you want to, that's fine. They're cool. I am inclined to just use little things that I've got around for me. But yeah, so I like manipulables. The little spell cards that Wizards was selling for a while, but hasn't updated. Put out an update pack in a long time. I think those are really handy. I have printed out spell cards for the spellcasting character that I play in a 5th edition game down here, and it makes a world of difference for me to be able to flip through and say, okay, this, and pull out the ones that are prepared, and look at my deck and say, okay, I'm going to play this spell. So yeah, manipulables help a lot for me. That's my advice. Otherwise, it's just kind of cueing them. They've got that. I try to, when I know I've got a player who does struggle with that, especially with things like sneak attack, or you got a weapon that adds poison damage, or this, that, and the other. Whenever they're about to roll that, I will kind of throw in, and remember your sneak attack, or remember you've got advantage, or that kind of thing. It's a lot to keep track of, and it would be really nice if the players would all keep track of it themselves. And it can be frustrating as a GM when your player doesn't remember how their character works. It can feel frustrating. But, it's a complicated game, and if you can help them, there's no reason not to. Now, I mean, if a player says, I don't remember how this works, and you also don't remember, it's totally cool to have them look it up. And you can even delay their turn while they have a chance to look it up, if possible. Now, there are times where this is a life or death moment, so you don't want to do that. But, especially if it's another player going next, let that player take their turn while this player looks that thing up. That way you don't completely bog the game down. But I would say as a GM, I try to practice patience. I try to be helpful. I try to cue my players. And if I can convince them that tokens are the way to go, to help them remember things because it helps me remember things, then I will. And that is all of our questions. So thank you very much. I hope any of that was helpful. We have a new Khyber Shards episode coming for you this coming Monday. New Khyber Shards Answers every Friday. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so in comments down below. Let us know your answers to any of these questions. The more information, the better, right? Maybe you've got some thoughts on helping players remember their class abilities that I didn't think of. In which case, let me know. I'd love to hear it because it comes up at tables all the time. What's your favorite way of introducing young players to Dungeons & Dragons? Let us know these things in the comments. You can find links to our Twitter and our other social media, as well as to the Geek Pantheon Patreon, to our merch store, to our coffee, and to all of our other social medias in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, thanks for rolling with us.